I learned that night that a woman can disappear without ever leaving the sidewalk. 6 months ago, I was standing outside the Halsted on Madison Avenue in a dress that cost more than my first car payment, rain soaking through silk and mascara sliding down my cheeks, while my husband walked away like I was nothing more than a mistake he'd finally corrected. Ethan didn't yell. He didn't slam a door. He just adjusted his cufflinks under the restaurant's gold awning and said, "You embarrass me, Claire," like he was commenting on the weather. Then he stepped into a waiting cab and told the driver to go. I remember the sound of the tires slicing through the puddles. I remember the doorman looking at me with polite discomfort, like I was a scene that didn't belong in front of a five-star entrance. I didn't chase the cab. I didn't scream. I just stood there in 4-inch heels that were sinking into the gutter while cold rain ran down the back of my neck and under my collar. And for the first time in 8 years of marriage, I felt completely invisible. My phone buzzed in my clutch. A message from Ethan. "We'll have my attorney call you." That was it. No apology. No explanation. Just logistics. The rain came down harder, drumming against the pavement, blurring the city lights into streaks of gold and white. I wrapped my arms around myself and told my body not to shake. I told myself I didn't need him. I told myself I deserved better. But there's a difference between knowing something and believing it. I was still trying to convince myself when a black SUV rolled to a stop at the curb in front of me. I barely noticed it at first. Manhattan traffic was always loud, always impatient. But this vehicle didn't honk. It didn't edge forward. It just waited. The engine hummed low and steady, like it had all the time in the world. The passenger door opened. Not wide, just enough. I saw polished leather shoes step onto wet pavement, then the sharp line of a tailored dark coat. The man who stepped out didn't rush. Rain slid off his shoulders as if it knew better than to linger. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his dark hair slicked back, his expression calm in a way that felt deliberate. Not curious. Not sympathetic. Observant. His eyes found me immediately. Not the restaurant. Not the cab disappearing down the block. Me. "You're going to get sick standing there," he said, his voice low, controlled, carrying easily over the rain. It wasn't concern. It was a statement. I straightened, instinct kicking in. "I'm fine." My voice came out thinner than I wanted. He glanced at my bare shoulders, at the way my hands were clenched tight enough to turn my knuckles white. "No," he replied quietly. "You're not." There was no pity in his tone, and somehow that made it worse. Or maybe better. I couldn't tell. The city moved around us. Yellow cabs, distant sirens, laughter spilling from behind the restaurant doors. But in that small slice of sidewalk, everything felt still. He took off his coat without breaking eye contact and draped it over my shoulders before I could protest. It was warm, heavy. It smelled faintly of cedar and something darker I couldn't place. "I don't even know you," I said. "Adrian Moretti." He answered simply, like the name should mean something. And maybe it did. I just didn't know it yet. He looked past me once, toward the direction Ethan's cab had gone, then back at me. His jaw tightened for a fraction of a second. "No one leaves someone they value in the rain," he said. The words hit harder than the storm. I swallowed. "I'll call a ride." "You won't," he said gently. Not a threat. A certainty. He opened the SUV door wider this time. Warm light spilled onto the wet sidewalk. "Come inside, Claire." I froze. I hadn't told him my name. The rain kept falling, cold and relentless, but for the first time that night, I didn't feel invisible. I felt seen, and that scared me more than being left behind. The inside of the SUV was warm enough to make my skin sting as it thawed, and for a second I just stood there on the curb, his coat heavy around my shoulders, my name still echoing in my head. I had not told him. I was sure of that. I would have remembered offering any part of myself to a stranger like this. "How do you know my name?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Adrian did not look surprised by the question. He glanced once toward the restaurant entranceway. The doorman was pretending not to stare, then back at me. "You walked out of there 20 minutes ago," he said calmly. "You were crying before the rain washed it away. Your husband said your name twice." The word husband sounded different in his mouth. Not affectionate, not respectful, evaluative. I felt heat rise to my face despite the cold. "That does not explain how you know my last name," I said. His expression shifted, just slightly. Not amusement, not apology, calculation. "It is my business to know who stands outside my meetings," he replied. My breath caught. "Your meetings?" He stepped aside and gestured toward the open door. "Get in the car, Claire. You are shaking." I hated that he was right. My teeth were starting to chatter, and the wet fabric clinging to my legs felt like ice. Pride told me to refuse. Survival told me to sit down. I chose survival. The leather seat was soft, warm from the heater, and as soon as the door closed, the noise of the city dulled to a distant hum. The driver did not turn around. He simply pulled away from the curb with smooth precision. I kept my hands folded in my lap, afraid to touch anything that looked like it cost more than my monthly mortgage. Adrian sat beside me, not too close, not far enough to ignore. "I did not ask you to follow me," I said quietly. "You did not have to," he replied. "I was already there." I turned toward him fully then. "You were at the Halstead?" "Yes." "Why?" He met my gaze without hesitation. "I own part of it." Of course he did. That explained the way the staff had subtly straightened when he stepped inside. The way the maitre d' had hurried toward him before Ethan pulled me outside. A memory surfaced, sharp and sudden. Ethan's voice earlier that evening, tight with ambition. "If this deal goes through, everything changes." I looked back at Adrian. "You were meeting my husband." "I was meeting a group of investors," he corrected smoothly. "Your husband was one of them." Something in his tone told me Ethan had not impressed him. I stared down at my hands. Rainwater dripped from my fingertips onto the floor mat. "I am sorry if I caused a scene," I murmured automatically, years of training kicking in. "Apologize. Smooth things over. Do not make trouble." Adrian's jaw tightened. "You did not cause anything," he said. His voice dropped lower, quieter, but more intense. "You were dismissed." The word sliced cleaner than any insult Ethan had thrown at me. I swallowed hard. "It is not your concern." It became my concern the moment he left you standing alone. Silence settled between us, heavy but not uncomfortable. Outside the tinted windows, Manhattan blurred into streaks of light and shadow. "Where are we going?" I finally asked. "Somewhere dry," he answered. "Somewhere you can think clearly." I hesitated. "And after that?" He looked at me then in a way that made my pulse skip. "Not possession. Not yet. Something more deliberate." "After that," he said evenly, "we decide what happens next." For the first time that night, I realized I was not just being rescued from the rain. I was being moved onto a different board entirely, and I did not know the rules of this game. We stopped in front of a townhouse on the Upper East Side, the kind with limestone steps and tall windows glowing gold against the night, and I felt the shift before the engine even turned off. This was not just somewhere dry. This was somewhere deliberate. The driver stepped out first, opening my door with quiet efficiency, and I hesitated only a second before placing my hand in Adrian's as I climbed out. His grip was steady, warm, not demanding, but not optional either. Inside, the air smelled faintly of polished wood and something expensive I could not name. Soft lighting reflected off marble floors, and somewhere deeper in the house, a clock ticked with calm precision. It was the kind of place where nothing was accidental. A woman in her 50s appeared from a hallway, dressed in simple black, her expression professional and discreet. "A towel and something warm," Adrian said without raising his voice. She nodded once and disappeared. I turned to him. "This is unnecessary." "Hypothermia is unnecessary," he replied. "Dry clothes are practical." I folded my arms, still wearing his coat. "You bring every woman who stands in the rain here." His eyes sharpened slightly, not offended, just assessing. "No," the single word carried weight. The woman returned with a thick white towel and a simple cashmere sweater, cream-colored, soft enough that my fingers instinctively curled into it. "You can use the powder room to the right," she said kindly. I stepped away, grateful for the distance, and locked the door behind me. In the mirror, I barely recognized myself. My hair clung damply to my cheeks. My eyeliner had faded into gray shadows under my eyes, and there was something else there too. Not just sadness. A crack. A fracture running through the image I had built for 8 years. I dried off slowly, changing into the sweater, folding my ruined dress over my arm like it was evidence from a life I no longer wanted. When I came back downstairs, Adrian was standing near the fireplace, jacket removed, sleeves rolled precisely to his wrists. A glass of amber liquid rested untouched on the table beside him. He looked up as I entered, and for a moment neither of us spoke. "Better," he said finally. It was not a question. I nodded. "Thank you." The words felt strange in my mouth. He gestured toward a chair near the fire. I sat. the warmth seeping into my bones, and realized how exhausted I was. "Tell me something," he said quietly. "Did you know he planned to leave you tonight?" The question landed gently, but it landed. I stared at the flames. "No," I admitted. But I knew something was wrong. I thought of the late nights, the sudden criticism, the way Ethan had started introducing me as Claire instead of my wife. Adrian watched me with unsettling focus. "You deserve to be chosen," he said after a moment. I let out a humorless laugh. "That is not how it works." "It is exactly how it works," he replied. His voice did not rise, but it deepened. Men choose investments. They choose alliances. They choose what they value. He chose to walk away. I looked up at him then, something sharp rising in my chest. "And you?" I asked before I could stop myself. The room felt smaller, quieter. Adrian stepped closer, not enough to crowd me, just enough that I felt the gravity of him. "I do not make decisions lightly," he said, "and I do not abandon what I step toward." The fire crackled softly behind him. Outside, the rain had slowed to a whisper against the windows. For the first time that night, I did not feel like a woman left behind. I felt like someone standing at the edge of a door that had just opened, and I did not yet know whether walking through it would save me or change me forever. The fire burned lower as the night stretched on, and I realized I had not checked my phone once since stepping inside this house. That felt dangerous. I reached for my clutch where I had left it on the side table and found 3 missed calls from Ethan and 2 messages. The first read, "We need to talk." The second was shorter. "Do not make this difficult." My stomach tightened. Adrian noticed the shift in my expression immediately. "He has started calling," he said, not asking. I nodded. "He wants control," Adrian continued, his tone even. "Not reconciliation." I looked up sharply. "You do not know that." "I know men who speak in ultimatums," he replied calmly. "They rarely mean anything else." I stood from the chair, pacing once in front of the fireplace. The warmth that had begun to settle into my skin felt suddenly thin. "I cannot stay here," I said. "This is too much." Tonight was already too much. Adrian did not block my path. He did not raise his voice. He simply watched me with that same measured focus. "Where will you go?" he asked quietly. I opened my mouth and then closed it again. The condo Ethan and I shared was in his name. My parents lived in Connecticut, 2 hours away, and I could already hear my mother's worried silence on the other end of the phone. My best friend, Lauren, had 2 children and a 2-bedroom apartment. I had spent 8 years building a life around a man who had just stepped out of it without looking back. "I will figure it out," I said finally, though it sounded hollow. Adrian stepped closer, but not close enough to crowd me. "You will," he agreed. "But not at midnight. Not while you are still shaking." His voice softened just slightly on the last word. I hated that he was right again. "I do not want you fixing this," I said, meeting his gaze directly. "I do not need another man making decisions for me." Something flickered in his eyes. "Respect, maybe." "I am not offering to fix you," he replied. "I am offering you space to decide without pressure." The distinction settled between us. Outside, the rain had stopped. Completely. The city beyond the tall windows looked scrubbed clean, lights reflecting off wet pavement in long silver streaks. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a notification from our joint account. A large transfer had been initiated. My pulse spiked. "He is moving money," I whispered. Adrian's expression did not change, but something colder moved beneath it. "He anticipated tonight," he said. It was not accusation. It was analysis. I felt foolish for not seeing it sooner. The dinner. The investors. The way Ethan had barely touched his food. This had been planned. I sank back into the chair, the weight of realization pressing against my ribs. Adrian crouched slightly so that we were eye level, not towering over me, not diminishing me. "Claire," he said quietly, and the way he said my name felt steady, grounding. "You are not powerless here." I searched his face for arrogance, for dominance, for any sign that this was another form of control. I did not find it. What I found was certainty. "Why do you care?" I asked again, softer now. He held my gaze without hesitation. "Because I watched him dismiss you in a room full of men who measure worth in contracts and numbers," he said. "And I do not tolerate waste." The word caught me off guard. Waste. Strength ignored, he clarified. Loyalty unvalued. Intelligence underestimated. My breath slowed. No one had ever described me like that. Not even Ethan when we first married. The clock on the wall ticked steadily behind us. marking time that suddenly felt different. Not lost. Not stolen. Just waiting. Stay tonight, Adrian said, rising smoothly. Tomorrow, you decide what you want. I will respect that. For the first time since the cab pulled away from the curb, the choice felt like mine again. And that frightened me almost as much as it steadied me. I did not sleep much that night. The guest bedroom was larger than my entire first apartment, with tall windows overlooking a quiet street and sheets that felt impossibly soft against my skin, but my mind would not slow down. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Ethan's back disappearing into that cab, his shoulders straight, his decision already made. Around 3 in the morning, I sat up and checked my phone again. The bank notification had cleared. The transfer was complete. A significant portion of our shared savings was gone. My chest tightened, but instead of panic, something colder settled in. Clarity. By the time the sky began to lighten into pale gray, I was already dressed in the borrowed sweater and standing at the window, watching early morning delivery trucks roll past. There was a knock at the door, soft and measured. Coffee, Adrian's voice said from the other side. I opened it to find him holding 2 mugs, steam rising between us. He looked as composed as he had the night before, dark shirt pressed, sleeves buttoned, as if he had slept deeply and without regret. Did you rest? He asked. I took the mug, the warmth seeping into my palms. Enough. He studied me for a moment. He moved the money, he said, not as a question. I nodded. It was planned. Adrian's jaw shifted slightly. Yes. I looked down into the coffee. I want to see the condo. The words surprised even me. He did not argue. He did not warn me. He simply set his mug down. We will go now. The drive across town felt different in daylight. The city looked ordinary, almost gentle, like nothing dramatic had happened beneath its skyline 12 hours earlier. When we pulled into the underground garage of the building Ethan and I had called home, my stomach tightened again. Adrian stepped out first, but did not reach for me this time. He let me walk beside him on my own. The elevator ride up to the 22nd floor felt longer than usual. When the doors opened, the hallway smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and familiarity. I unlocked the door. The condo was quiet. Too quiet. The entry table where I used to leave my keys was empty. The framed wedding photo that had hung opposite the couch was gone, leaving a pale rectangle on the wall. My closet door stood open. Several of Ethan's suits were missing. So were his watches. The drawers in his office had been cleared. I stood in the middle of the living room and felt something inside me finally settle into place. Not heartbreak, not even anger, just understanding. Adrian remained a few feet behind me, giving me space, his presence steady but unobtrusive. He did not just leave, I said softly. He exited. Adrian's voice was calm. Men who plan exits often believe they are the only ones allowed to prepare. I walked into the kitchen. The marble island still held the bowl of lemons I had bought 3 days ago. Fresh, bright, untouched. My phone buzzed again. A message from Ethan. We can discuss terms like adults. I stared at the screen, then slowly typed back a single sentence. I will have my attorney contact you. My hands did not shake this time. I set the phone down and turned toward Adrian. He was watching me carefully, not proud, not possessive, just attentive. You do not have to handle this alone, he said quietly. I met his gaze. I know. The difference was subtle but powerful. Last night, I had been standing in the rain, waiting for someone to decide my worth. This morning, in the empty echo of a home that no longer felt like mine, I realized something had shifted. I was not asking to be saved. I was choosing not to be dismissed again. And Adrian Moretti was still standing there, not in front of me, not pulling me forward, but beside me, as if he had already decided that wherever this next move led, he was not letting me face it alone. By noon the condo no longer felt like a home, but like a showroom after closing, polished and hollow, echoing with decisions already made, and I stood in the center of the living room trying to decide what pieces of my life were actually mine. I packed slowly, deliberately, choosing only what I had brought into the marriage or paid for myself. Clothes. My grandmother's silver bracelet. The framed photo of my parents at Coney Island the summer before my father got sick. I left the expensive artwork Ethan had insisted on buying. I left the crystal barware we never used. Adrian did not rush me. He moved quietly through the space, making a call in low tones near the window, his words controlled and precise. I caught fragments. Attorney. Documentation. Asset review. When he ended the call, he slipped his phone back into his pocket and approached without crossing into my orbit. Your name is on more than you think, he said. I looked up from the suitcase resting open on the bed. What does that mean? It means he underestimated you legally as well as personally, he replied. There was no smugness in his voice, only fact. You are entitled to half of what was accumulated during the marriage, including the investment accounts he believes are protected. A small, stunned laugh escaped me. You looked into our accounts. I looked into his, Adrian corrected gently. You are still deciding what you want. Information is not control. It is leverage. I zipped the suitcase closed and sat on the edge of the bed, absorbing that. For years I had trusted Ethan to manage everything financial. I had signed where he pointed. I had believed partnership meant not questioning details. I feel foolish, I admitted. Adrian leaned one shoulder lightly against the doorframe. Trust is not foolish, he said. Misuse of it is. The words settled deep. I stood again and carried the suitcase into the hallway. As we stepped back into the elevator, I felt lighter, not because the situation had improved, but because I had stopped pretending it was something else. In the garage, Adrian opened the trunk and placed my suitcase inside without ceremony. When we were back in the car, I finally asked the question that had been hovering since last night. Why are you doing this? He did not answer immediately. The city passed outside the window, sunlight glinting off steel and glass. Because I watched him treat you like an accessory, he said at last. And I do not invest in accessories. I turned toward him fully. I am not something to invest in. His gaze met mine, steady and unflinching. No, he agreed. You are someone worth standing beside. The distinction was subtle, but it mattered. My phone vibrated again. This time it was a message from Lauren. I heard about last night. Are you okay? I typed back, I am handling it. And for the first time, I believed that was true. Adrian's townhouse came into view again, familiar now in daylight. As the car slowed, he looked at me with that same measured certainty. Your attorney will contact us by the end of the day, he said. You will not be rushed into anything. I inhaled slowly, feeling the weight of choice settle comfortably instead of crushing. Last night, I had been standing in a storm waiting for someone to decide my future. Now, with a suitcase in the trunk and sunlight replacing rain, I realized something else had shifted. I was no longer reacting. I was preparing. And Adrian. Moretti was not trying to carry me. He was clearing the path and waiting to see if I would walk it on my own. By late afternoon, the townhouse had shifted from refuge to headquarters, quiet but purposeful, and I sat at the long dining table across from a man I had known less than 24 hours while my entire future was being rearranged in calm, measured sentences. Adrian's attorney joined us by secure video call, a composed woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a voice that wasted no time. She addressed me directly, not Adrian, outlining what I was legally entitled to, what documents we would request, what steps Ethan would likely attempt next. I listened carefully, forcing myself to stay present, to understand every word instead of nodding blindly the way I had for years. When the call ended, the room felt different. Not heavy, focused. Adrian closed the laptop and looked at me. You handled that well, he said. I exhaled slowly. I should have handled everything sooner. He did not soften the truth. You trusted someone who asked you not to look behind the curtain, he replied. That is not weakness. That is misplaced loyalty. The phrase lingered in my mind long after he stood and stepped away to take another call. I walked to the window, watching the late-day traffic inch along the avenue. My phone buzzed again. Ethan. I stared at the screen before answering. Claire, he said, his tone clipped, controlled. We need to be reasonable about this. I felt something inside me steady. I am being reasonable, I replied. My attorney will contact yours. A pause. You are overreacting. I did what was necessary. Necessary. The word slid across my skin like ice. Leaving me in front of your investors was necessary. I asked quietly. Another pause, shorter this time. You made things complicated, he said. You were not aligned with where I am headed. I closed my eyes briefly. There it was. Not anger. Not remorse. Strategy. Then you should have said that before the rain. I answered, and ended the call before he could respond. My hands were steady when I lowered the phone. Adrian was standing a few feet away, having clearly heard enough to understand. He did not ask what was said. He did not offer to intervene. He simply studied my face. You do not need to answer him again, he said softly. I know. And I meant it. Evening settled in layers of gold and blue outside the windows. A quiet dinner was set in the kitchen, simple and understated, nothing like the orchestrated meals Ethan had once used to impress clients. I found myself relaxing into the silence between Adrian and me, into the absence of performance. What happens if this becomes public? I asked after a while. He met my gaze evenly. It will, he said. He will attempt to control the narrative. I nodded slowly. And you? A faint shift at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile. I do not compete in narratives, he replied. I operate in outcomes. The confidence in his voice did not feel reckless. It felt practiced, earned. I set my fork down and looked at him fully. I do not want revenge, I said. I want fairness. His eyes darkened slightly, thoughtful. Fairness, he repeated. Then that is what you will have. The certainty in his tone was not a promise of destruction. It was a commitment to balance. As the city lights flickered on one by one beyond the glass, I realized something else had shifted inside me. I was no longer reacting to Ethan's choices. I was defining my own. And for the first time in years, I did not feel like an extension of someone else's ambition. I felt like a woman reclaiming her ground, with a man beside her who did not ask her to shrink in order to stand next to him. The next morning the headlines started quietly, like a ripple before a wave. I saw it first on my phone while standing at the kitchen counter, sunlight cutting across the marble in clean, sharp lines. An online financial column mentioned internal instability within one of Ethan's major partnerships. Nothing dramatic, just speculation. A delay in funding. Questions about liquidity. I read the paragraph twice, my pulse steady, my expression unreadable even to myself. Adrian walked in a moment later, jacket already on, his presence filling the room without noise. He glanced at my screen and then at me. It begins, he said simply. I swallowed. You did not promise retaliation. I promised fairness, he corrected calmly. Investors do not like surprises. I set the phone down. Did you speak to them? He held my gaze for a long second. I asked questions, he said. They drew conclusions. There was no triumph in his voice. No satisfaction. Just inevitability. I turned back toward the window. The city below moved as it always did, taxis sliding between lanes, pedestrians crossing against the light. Nothing outwardly changed, yet everything had shifted beneath the surface. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Ethan. What did you say to them? I stared at the words, feeling a strange detachment. For years I had worried about disappointing him. Now he sounded uncertain. I typed slowly. I said nothing. My attorney will handle communication. The response came almost instantly. You are making a mistake. I let the message sit unread after that. Adrian stepped closer, not touching me, just near enough that I felt the steadiness of him. He is used to controlling the board, he said quietly. When the pieces move on their own, it unsettles him. I turned toward him. I do not want this to become a war. His expression softened slightly. Then do not fight, he replied. Stand. That is enough. Later that afternoon, I met with my attorney in person. Adrian did not attend. He insisted this part be entirely mine. The office smelled of paper and polished wood, and as I reviewed documents detailing shared assets, I felt something unexpected rise inside me. Not greed. Not anger. Dignity. My name appeared beside Ethan's in more places than I had realized. Contributions. Joint signatures. Legal rights. When I walked back outside an hour later, the air felt clearer. Adrian's car was waiting across the street, but he remained inside, giving me the space to approach on my own. I slid into the passenger seat and exhaled slowly. I am not asking for revenge, I told him. I am asking for balance. He nodded once. Balance has weight, he said. Most people only notice when it shifts. As we drove, my phone remained silent. No more accusations. No more urgent demands. Just quiet. The kind of quiet that comes when someone realizes the outcome is no longer theirs to dictate. That evening, as the skyline turned gold and then violet, I stood on the townhouse balcony alone, the breeze cool against my face. I thought about the woman who had stood in the rain less than 48 hours ago, waiting for a man to decide whether she was worth keeping. I barely recognized her. Adrian stepped out behind me after a moment, his footsteps soft against the stone. He did not ask what I was thinking. He did not offer promises. He simply stood beside me, shoulder to shoulder, looking out over the city like it belonged to him, but not claiming ownership over me. And in that silence, I understood something simple and unshakable. I was no longer waiting to be chosen. I had already chosen myself, and he was still there, not because I needed saving, but because he had decided I was not someone to let go. The settlement took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of structured calls, measured emails, and carefully worded statements that never rose above civility, yet carried the weight of finality. I did not attend the last negotiation in person. I chose not to. Instead, I sat in Adrian's study, sunlight falling across the polished desk, and waited for my attorney's call. When it came, her voice was steady. The division would be equitable. My share transferred. The condo to be sold. No public dispute. No spectacle. I thanked her, ended the call, and sat very still. It was over. Not the marriage that had ended the night he walked away. This was the unraveling of its shadow. Adrian stood near the bookshelf, watching me with that same deliberate quiet that had marked every step since the ring. "It is done," I said softly. He inclined his head once. "Yes." I expected a rush of triumph or relief, something cinematic and loud. Instead, what I felt was space. Open, clean space where something heavy had been. I rose and walked toward the window, looking down at the city that had not paused for any of this. Yellow cabs moved in steady lines. Pedestrians crossed streets with coffee cups in hand. Life continued. "He signed without contest," Adrian said after a moment. His partners advised against prolonging it. I turned toward him. "Because of you?" His expression did not change. "Because clarity is persuasive," he replied. I studied him carefully. For weeks he had moved pieces quietly, never speaking in threats, never demanding gratitude. He had not once asked what I intended to give in return. "You could have destroyed him," I said. The words were not admiration. They were observation. Adrian's gaze held mine, unwavering. "I do not destroy what corrects itself," he answered. "Consequences are enough." That was the difference. Not revenge. Balance. I walked closer, stopping just within his reach. "You did not have to involve yourself," I said. "You could have driven away that night." His jaw tightened slightly, a flicker of memory passing through his eyes. "I do not drive away from things I intend to protect," he said quietly. The word protect landed differently now. Not possession. Not ownership. Intention. I thought back to the woman standing in soaked silk under restaurant lights, feeling small and dismissed. I barely recognized her. "I do not need to be rescued," I said carefully. "I know," he replied immediately. "That is why I stayed." Silence stretched between us, but it was not uncertain. It was grounded. The kind of silence built on mutual awareness rather than tension. "What happens now?" I asked. Adrian stepped closer, not touching me yet, just near enough that I could feel the warmth of him. "Now," he said evenly, "you build whatever you want without asking permission." His hand lifted, hesitated, then gently brushed a strand of hair back from my face. The gesture was simple, controlled, respectful. "And you?" I asked. He held my gaze with quiet intensity. "I remain," he said, "unless you decide otherwise." That was the difference between him and the man who had left. One had walked away when I complicated his image. The other stood still when I reclaimed my ground. I looked out over the skyline once more, the city glowing under early evening light, and felt something settle inside me with calm certainty. I had not been saved from the storm. I had stepped out of it on my own. He had simply refused to let me stand there alone. And for the first time in my life, being chosen did not feel like dependency. It felt like recognition.